This is a Zoom video presentation on sailing, anchorages, and hiking the Channel Islands given to the members of the Ventura Yacht Club by fellow member Jeff Beller during the COVID-19 pandemic on February 6, 2021. As Jeff stated in the presentation, always check the weather and swell forecast before boating to the islands and follow all national park rules and recreational boating practices for a safe and enjoyable experience.
Anacapa Island, and I hope you can see my pointer on your screen because I'll be using it. Santa Cruz Island, which is probably the best known island where most of our cruising happens, the next one. And then the outer island, Santa Rosa and San Miguel. We're going to spend most of tonight talking about Santa Cruz Island and doing a trip around it, but we'll also take a poke over at San Miguel and Santa Rosa. So Santa Cruz Island, if you look at a map of it, the eastern third of it's national park, NPS property, and the western 2/3 is owned by the Nature Conservancy. And why do you care about that? Because that's private property, and you actually need a permit to go ashore on the Nature Conservancy property, and you can get that online. The website looks like this, and sign up and you get a permit for a calendar year. Anywhere else that's national park, you can go ashore anywhere at any time except for some limited closures for seabird nesting. The original copy of this presentation, we spent a whole bunch of time on weather. I actually plan to make a whole separate presentation on that. We're going to do that a month from tonight and just go into detail on how to interpret the weather, how it applies to you going out in the islands and so forth, in a lot more detail than we can do tonight. I'm not going to make a meteorologist out of you, but what I want to do is show you just the wealth of information that's available through the internet and the National Weather Service and other areas, and how to use it to your best advantage. But we will just mention a couple things tonight. So what we all want to do is avoid a day like this, right? Island Packers calls this their rescue runs. The only reason they go out is they have to bring somebody back from the islands that's out there camping. If you look out from the harbor entrance and see this, you don't need to tell anybody that you were a wimp and you had to turn around. Anyway, the place to start for weather, to start looking at the National Weather Service forecast for the Santa Barbara Channel, Point Conception to Point Mugu. Give a pretty quick synopsis. The problem with it is it covers a huge area that's very variable. So like, look at here, it says tonight, winds 15 to 25, gusts to 30, becoming 5 to 15 after midnight, strongest western portion. That'd scare almost everybody off. At least it would me. But here is your friend. This is sailflow.com. It gives you a much better picture of where the wind is. So if you look here, you'll see the yellows and the oranges off to the left, and that's the 25 or 20 knot. And then over by Ventura, which is up in the middle of the screen, it's pretty calm and mellow. It looks like 8 to 10 knots. So I'd probably go out on a day like this. But if you looked at the National Weather Service forecast and just took it as is, you wouldn't get this full picture. So you can look at SailFlow for out to a week or 10 days. And very typically, you'll see the outer islands are much stronger winds. So here you can see there's kind of a line of wind coming down to Santa Rosa Island and San Miguel Island. And then it's much more hospitable down here in Santa Cruz. That's a very common wind pattern. So keep that in mind. You see this? We call it the purple bruise. Stay home, because that's what will happen to you. You get bruised. There's another little program that just became available about a year or so ago that's I actually like better, called windy.com. And it does the same kind of thing in a more animated way. So I'll let you explore that, and we'll talk about all of this more next month. And just one other thing to be aware of, this is the CDIP experimental swell forecast, and it shows long period swell for an extended period of time, like out 4 or 5 days. Good thing to check. Yeah, you want to avoid this kind of thing. This was Little Scorpion Anchorage one day in the anchor. Okay, any questions on kind of weather stuff before we move on?
Yeah, Jeff, what do you use the long period swell for?
Okay, excellent question. Crossing the channel, the long period swell usually doesn't bother you. You go up and down, but it doesn't throw the boat around in a hobby horse. The front side of the island, especially out of the northwest, catches the long period swell, and the anchorages can be very uncomfortable. A lot of surge in there. Even more so on the south side with long period swell from hurricanes. If you've ever been like in Coaches or in Forney's and tried to go ashore with a long period swell coming in out of the south, can be pretty interesting. So that's the reason I would pay attention to the long period swell. Strategies for getting to the island. If you remember, our typical prevailing winds come out of the northwest at the west end of the channel, and they come down here along the north side of the Santa Cruz Island, kind of a westerly, and then curl back up kind of like this towards Oxnard. So if you take out of Ventura and sail for Santa Cruz Island, it's typically right on the nose, even when you're pointing at little scorpion. So motor out in the morning, and about the time the wind fills in, you can crack off, roll out your sails, and have a nice closer beam route to Pelican or Fries or Prisoners. So that's a favorite strategy of ours, and no tacking up the island in the windy lane, which is this section here along the north side of the island. If it's not too rough, it's actually fairly easy to sail up the island. And this is actually a track of one of my trips. You get a nice lift along the coast there. So 3 or 4 tacks, you can sail all the way around the west end and down to the other side of the island. Conversely, another popular thing is to head over just to the south and go into Smugglers like this. You can usually sail this. And then the next leg up to Coaches, there's almost never any wind. So that part is a motorboat ride. We're going to go through some of the anchors now. We're going to start with Scorpion, upper right-hand corner, and we're going to do counterclockwise around the island. Oh, before we do that, okay, anchoring. Okay, if you're not comfortable anchoring, get comfortable anchoring, because there are no moorings out here. Successful anchoring is really pretty simple. Here are my steps. Okay, pick your spot, decide on a single anchor or a bow and stern anchor, and we'll talk about that in a second. Look for a clear spot. You see kelp and eelgrass, try and find a spot that's just sand. Lower your anchor to the bottom and start moving backwards. Don't pull on it. Lay it all out, at least 5 to 1. Then when you got 5 to 1 out, back down on it gently, stretch it all out, and then gradually pull on it until you're pulling on it really hard. And I pull on mine 2,000 RPM every time. In thousands of nights of anchoring, I can count in 2 fingers how many times I've drugged. That's the secret. Lay out plenty of scope. Don't pull on it till it's all out. Okay, 2 anchors, basically the same thing, but one off the stern in addition to the one off the bow. And I had a column in my forecast last year about easy ways to do this. But the whole point here of 2 anchors is to keep the boat pointed into the swell, or if there's not room to swing on a single hook. And that's often the case in our anchorages here in the Channel Islands. So here's an example of the anchorage at Fries. And we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 boats, all on stern. And if they're on a single hook, there'd be room for only 1 boat. And I did a quick little map here, which ones you can hang on a single hook and which ones are bow and stern. So it's about 50-50. All right, let's sail on over and see what we can find here. Okay, we'll start with Scorpion. This is the chart for Little Scorpion, is this area behind the rocks. And the main Scorpion anchorage is over here. That was the landing for the island originally when the ranchers were here. Okay, an aerial view of Scorpion. So these are the rocks that you see from much when you're coming in. The area anchor, you can kind of see, at least on my picture, look a little shallower along here behind the rocks. And that's probably about 30, sorry, my internet's cutting out again, 30 to 35 feet. Here out in the middle, it's up to 60. So that's not a good place to anchor. You want to get along in here. Lots of places to explore here. Lots of hiking and diving. But this is a picture from the anchor where I just described, looking through the rocks. And back at Anacapa behind us. You got them here. There's all kinds of little nooks and crannies to explore. The other side of the Scorpion Rocks, this is the main Scorpion anchorage where the pier is now located. It's not in this picture, but it just got open today. This anchorage is fine when it's calm weather, but it's not very well protected from the swell. Okay, hiking. Probably one of the better places on the island to hike. So this is a map from National Park Service, and I'm going to take on a little walk from, notice over here, upper right, this is our anchorage. So we'll take our dinghy around and come ashore here on the beach at the main Scorpion anchorage. And then we're going to hike here and along this cliff to Cavern Point and around and over to Potato and then back. And it's about a 5-mile round trip hike. So landing on the beach, pretty straightforward here. And we got a tour guide door, and we'll hike past the ranch buildings. And here's another aerial view. You can see the trail starting up and it goes up here along the cliff. And you walk right along the edge the whole way. It is spectacular. At this time of year when the flowers start coming out. I think even if you don't go over on your own boat, take an island packer boat over it and go for a hike in the springtime. So we're going to hike along that cliff there that's in the distance.
Hey, Jeff.
Yes.
Last time I was at Scorpion, it was closed because of the construction on the new pier. Do you know what the status is on that?
I understand today that Island Packers just began landing again at Scorpion. I'm not sure if private parties can land there, but I suspect they can if Island Packers can. Pier itself is close to completion.
So I was having a little trouble hearing it, but I think what you were saying is that the pier is closed, but it's open to hikers. You can land on the beach and hike.
I will find out, guys, know, because I don't know for sure. Up until just a day or two ago, it was still closed. Okay, so the far end of that hike overlooks Potato Bay.
We're still looking at Dory right now, so we're having a slow load up on the screen. Dory looks great in her red backpack and red hat. There we go. Now we have a picture.
That's Potato.
That's Potato. Yellow flowers.
Okay.
Attack bird.
Yeah.
White flowers. There you go.
Yeah. So here's the map again. And where we just hiked is along the cliff edge here out to Potato. You can hike all the way over to Smugglers. Actually, it's not difficult, but it's a fairly arduous hike because it's about 8 or 9 miles round trip. And it's often hot. Okay. And then get back to the boat and enjoy a nice sunset and the birds. Okay, another easy weekend trip is Smugglers Cove. And we like it because when the channel is really windy, Windy Lane is living up to its reputation. And you pass under San Pedro Point, it goes instantly almost dead calm. It's just remarkably night and day difference. The little satellite view. So the area here where this little box is, this is Smugglers Cove. And then over here is called Yellowbanks Cove. The wind tends to come over the top of the island here, and the boat's set pointing into the island. It's a single hook anchorage, and there's room in here for 40 or 50 boats without any trouble. Sometimes we get a swell around the south side of the island, and Smugglers gets a little uncomfortable because you're setting sideways to the swell. A little trick that we learned years ago is go down here by Yellowbanks and anchor down here, and the wind is coming around the corner this way from the south, and it swings the boat into the swell. So we find Yellowbanks just a little bit more comfortable. Yeah, so this is a very typical Yellowbanks or Smugglers day, just dead calm. The beach landing at Smugglers can be a little challenging because it's a very long, shallow beach. So there's often breaking waves right here, 2 or 3 feet high. So watch it when you come ashore. Okay, yeah, this is Yellowbanks just right next door to it. All right, let's continue west from Scorpion anchorages. Here's the next one I promised. This is Potato Harbor, and it got a very undeserved reputation because it looks like it faces northwest, which it does. But if you look here on the chart, you'll see that Potato Rock actually blocks a lot of what comes into it. And on a moderate day, it's an excellent anchorage, even with a west wind. And any kind of north wind, northeast, south, southeast, even in really, really strong conditions, it's like a hurricane hole. So we've sat here through a bunch of winter storms and also Santa Ana winds and completely comfortable. It's a magical place. You're surrounded by all kinds of fairy castle walls and bird life, fog coming in and out over the cliffs. Here's a little beach you can go ashore here. This is probably the one downside of this anchorage is there's not a lot to explore ashore unless you're really ambitious to climb up the cliffs like I did here. Gives you an idea of the anchorage, the size of it. It's actually much bigger than it looks when you come in. And over here, right, if you recognize these guys, Lennon Beatty and a friend of theirs. Just outside harbor, Potato Harbor on the north side is just wonderful kayaking, exploring all over the Cavern Point. All kinds of caves in here.
So Jeff, if you go in and there's a boat in the center, do you prefer to anchor your boat to the west or to the east?
Yeah, okay, so where I'm anchored, I'm about in 20 feet, and my stern hook's probably in 12 or 15 feet behind me, and the bow's probably in 30. So you can go out in front of us. I think it was Joe who asked, where you would anchor. Out in front of me, you can anchor probably in 40 feet. And still have room to swing completely clear of me. You don't want to get too much behind where these 2 boats or 3 boats are anchored right now. It gets really shallow and rocky back there.
Just to kind of hear Joe's question answered, if somebody's in there, do you prefer to be on the west or the east side of that?
Well, you're looking north right here, so west would be to the left. Yes, it would be the west.
I guess I should say favoring the north side of that harbor or the south side of the harbor?
That's right in the middle, probably 400 or 500 feet across there.
Oh,
You got plenty of room. So I was talking about exploring the caves, and it's really good kayaking and digging, fun place. And if you like to fish, so here we got about 10 nights worth of fish tacos in this guy. Okay, so the next section of anchorages is just to the west of Chinese, beginning with Prisoners, where the main pier is, Pelican, and then there's a couple small ones past that. So Prisoners is the main landing for the Nature Conservancy, the National Park Service, and the Navy. And an ideal day, this is what it looks like. And it's usually pretty nice. The nice thing here is there's a dinghy dock right there in this corner of the main pier, thanks to Don Mills and some of his friends that helped build it. It's out of the water during the winter, by the way. If you went there right now, it's not in the water, but it will be probably in March or April. Okay, hikes from Prisoners. So my favorite hike here takes off from Prisoners. I'm assuming we can see the map.
Yes.
Okay, goes up the road for about a mile, and then there's a trail that takes off. There's dotted lines here. It's a Del Norte trail, and it goes up and down a bunch of canyons and ends up by the campground and a place called the Del Norte Cabin. So this is typical, and oh, darn pretty flowers more again.
What's the distance or time to hike out to that cabin?
It's most of the day, probably 4 or 5 hours round trip, maybe 2 hours each way. You take your time.
That's not bad.
This is the Del Norte campground. Got a nice view, but not much else to recommend. There's no water. You keep going past the Del Norte campground, up the next little valley, and it's not marked. There's no signs. Just follow the road, and you come into a little valley and come around the corner, and this is what you see. It's an old line cabin from when they had cows on the island, and it's been restored and kept up as a historical relic. So it has a beautiful view of Chinese Harbor, and they put picnic tables out there. So you can't go inside, but you can take your lunch and sit out there and look over things. Joe Walsh, the rock and roll star, who's a local from Santa Barbara, actually donated quite a bit of money to help restore this building. And old cows. These little cute guys are about the size of a small house cat, and they are everywhere. Real success story. They're almost extinct in the late 1990s. We had about a dozen of them between this island and another half a dozen on San Miguel. Now over 1,300 of them on Santa Cruz Island. It's a very rare day you don't see at least one or two of them. They don't seem to have much fear, and a lot of times they just trot up the road next to you. Okay, let's move on to Pelican. This is probably everybody's favorite anchorage on the north side of the island. It was the site of a hotel and resort in the early 1800s, Iron Eaton. This is a rare day that we were hanging on a single hook. You can see there's only a handful of boats in here. And it was probably because the first person in was already on a single hook, but I recommend bow and stern hooks here. Okay, the neatest little hike here is to go ashore on the beach that's right next to Pelican and hike over to Prisoners, where we just were a few minutes ago. It's about 2 miles each way, and it's a wonderful little hike. Takes about an hour one way, and you get to see another one of these little foxies. So there is a landing right behind the anchorage here, and on a rock, and there's some cables that you can see when you're anchored back here. So those are probably the two most popular anchorages on the north side. Going west from there's a couple small ones. If Pelican is too crowded, try one of these. So this is Twin Harbor, and it's right next door, maybe half a mile to the west. Room for 2 boats comfortably. If you really like to be by yourself, the next one up is called Orizaba, and it's this little cove, and it's really room for just 1 boat, bow and stern. It's a very picturesque little spot. Some of you may remember the big white mussel-shaped rock that's just out west of there. You anchor just behind that, and great place to fish. So we just came up from here on the lower right. There was Pelican, Twin Harbor. Orizaba is right in here. Then there are a couple little nooks here, but almost nobody ever stops in them. Flats, the Green Grotto. The next one is Fry's right here. It's a small little harbor, but it probably has the best protection in a big blow. The swell doesn't usually get in here. One thing I'll point out here is that often the wind blows down the canyon in the afternoon. So you'll see a lot of boats that anchor bow into the beach. And we anchor with a bow and stern here for sure. It's also the site of a big quarry. All the rock for the Santa Barbara breakwater came out of this area right here on the left of the picture. There is some hiking here. It's actually very strenuous. You can get up on top of the cliffs between fries in the next anchorage over, which is called Diablo. Great views.
Where do you find the trailhead? Do you go up that canyon that's all wooded, or where's?
There's a little trail that goes up that canyon. The last few years, it's been so overgrown that I did much, but you just there aren't really any hills there. Their trails are going up. You can go maybe half a mile. You can see some of the old detritus there, some junk that's left over. This is actually, you take off from right above the beach where you land your kayak or your dinghy on the west side, and you'll see some scrambling paths going kind of straight up, and then once you get up on top of the ridge, then you just follow the ridge.
And that's on the inland side of the quarry?
So this is looking down from where I just described. So we came up that hillside that's right in the middle of the picture. So the quarry is on the far side, and this is a pretty rigorous hike scramble. Have some sturdy shoes and full of sea lion, or no, these are harbor seal pups on the beach. A little lingcod.
With a big mouth.
Yeah. Moving to the west, the next significant anchorage is called Cueva Valdez down in here, and club's been to it a couple times. This was one of our recent trips about 2 or 3 years ago. Actually came across this whale right as we were coming into the anchorage. So this spot's kind of cool because Cueva, as the name implies, is caves. There's 3 caves here in this cliff, and you actually land your dinghy in the cave on the beach, and then walk out through another cave onto the main beach outside. So it's kind of unique. One thing I would say about Cueva Valdez is it has a notorious reputation for sometimes being very rolly at night. It'll be perfectly calm like this during the day, and then about 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock in the morning, the swell will roll around the corner and just roll you from beam to beam. And it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens fairly often. Just something to be aware of. Put out a flopper stopper. Okay, west from Cueva Valdez is the Painted Cave, which if the weather allows, everybody should take a little trip there. So there's 2 strategies. You can have somebody on the boat drop you off, and you can go in circles while they go in the cave, or you can anchor down. There's an anchorage just to the east of it, maybe half a mile, called Hazards. Look at it on the chart, and you can pick it out. Anchor your boat there and then take your dinghy up. So this is in Hazards, looking towards what's called Profile Point, and Painted Cave is just around past Profile Point. Painted Cave, purported to be one of the longest sea caves in the world. It's actually pretty darn large. You can drive a boat clear inside it if you've got the guts to do it. Yeah, so it's over 1,200 feet long. If you go in with your dinghy, bring the brightest lights you got, and it still won't be bright enough. So if you come around Profile Point, this is what Painted Cave looks like. And that's probably 70 to 90 feet high. And you get closer and it gets narrower. And Island Packers actually drives their boat in all the way around the corner there. This is looking from the bridge of one of the Island Packer boats back over the stern. So it shows you how far they go in and what it's named for. I mean, there's all kinds of color in the rocks. The whole area here out to the west end has all kinds of caves. This is another one Miguel and I poked our nose in, called the Blimp Hanger Cave. I don't know how these come up with these names. Oh, okay, this is out of order. So this is where I anchored at Hazards to go up to Painted Cave. This is a little side hike up canyon at Ladies, and I don't have any pictures of the Ladies anchorage, but it's a little 1-2 boat anchorage in that same area. Actually, it's back by Cueva Valdez, so sorry about that, guys. I didn't put that on the chart. Continuing our circumnavigation, we'll go out around the west end of the island. It has an area called the Potato Patch. Sometimes there can be some really strong currents churning back and forth in there, and it churns up the water and makes it kind of choppy. Just be aware of it, and usually a mile or 2 either side of it and you're out of it. You come around the west end through the Potato Patch and then around Fraser Point. And if you look at the numbers here, you'll see it's fairly shallow, 4 fathoms, 6 fathoms, and there's a lot of water and wind moving here. So you don't want to cut this point real close. It can get some pretty big waves. So I would, stick out here around the 8, 9, 10 fathom line, 60 feet, 50 feet if you can. And as you're heading into Forney's Cove, which is our next anchorage. You go way wide and come back in here where the name, kind of where it says Forney Cove on the chart. That's kind of where you want to approach it from. One of our favorites, it has this sense that you're out on the edge of the world, and it's not often or not visited by a lot of people. So it's almost never crowded. So anyway, once again, the satellite view with Forney's right there in the middle. And this is what it looks like from ashore on a foggy day. It's got a fair amount of kelp in most years, and you'll wind your way in through the kelp and find a clear spot to drop your anchor. And typically anchor here in like 15 feet. Shallow, you hang on a single hook, no problem. Lots of room. So I think this picture, when it displays for you guys, you can kind of see the kelp patches there back behind us that you would snake your way in through. So that kelp also helps damp the swell and the chop coming in. It's usually a really comfortable anchorage. Fishing's good here, both inside the bay and just outside the bay. Good scuba diving outside the bay. Hiking, you can go ashore and hike up to the end of Fraser Point and look over the west end. The islands that you'll see from here will be Santa Rosa and San Miguel, all the way up to Point Conception. So one challenge here, especially in the summertime, the south swell can get into here. The beach landing can be a little challenging. Dory and I have given up on most of the time on taking the dinghy in. We got tired of digging the sand out of it after we got pummeled. And we take kayaks ashore. They're a little bit easier to get the sand out of. Anyway, you can do it, and it's not always like this. But just if you pay attention to the swell, if you're not a surfer, talk to somebody that is, that knows how to read the waves and the wave patterns. Okay, these people here, they were ashore and they were going to show us how it's done. They're coming out. So they're looking at it, getting ready. They're saying, should I get in? Should I get in? And they're already late. And the wave broke all over them. So they filled the boat completely with water. But I don't think they lost their glasses. Anyway, it happens to everybody. We had a cool sunset here, and there's a hole through that cliff in front of us. Besides hiking up to the peninsula that's in the background there, which is an easy hike, short, like 15 minutes, you can hike all the way up to the top of the ridge and look over the west end. Come around the west end and look up at that cliff. It's very imposing. Well, when you're on top looking down, it's even more imposing. So you got about an 1,800-foot drop to the water from here. This area off the west end of Santa Cruz is very prolific for humpback whales. They like to feed in there and breach, so keep your eyes out for them. Forney is right up here in the corner of the west end is where we just were. Continuing our little circumnavigation, we'll go quite a ways before we come to the next good spot. This area between Santa Rosa and Santa Cruz usually funnels the wind in here, and it gets pretty windy, can make for a really nice sleigh ride down. If it's a little windier than you are comfortable with, don't fret too much, because when you get down here to Gull Island, which is right here, the wind pretty much dies off really quick. So you have an hour or two of sailing down south to Gull Island, and then it gets really light. And sometimes you see a cool tall ship like this, the Tullymore. I think there's a sail training ship out of San Diego. So when you get down by Gull Island, key things here, the Gull Island's right there in the lower middle part of the chart. Look at all the stuff between there and where it says Punta Arena, the little point straight to the north of it. There's all kinds of rocks and foul ground in there. Don't go through there. It is possible, but don't do it if you haven't done it before and know the little slots and so forth. Go around the south side there. It's completely clear. Up here in the upper left-hand corner, Morris Point. Never spent the night here, but I've stopped here several times and had like a lunch hook. It's kind of a neat spot. I want to explore some more. So we'll continue down around Gull Island. And if you look at our picture here, just over the top of my Dodger underneath the main boom. That's what Gull Island looks like from the distance when you're approaching. And you're going to go around it to the right. And here, a good satellite picture shows you why you don't want to try and go between Gull Island and the main island. Next favorite anchorage for us is Willows. We're getting down, we're just a couple miles from Coaches Prietos, if you guys know where that is. Willows is almost as nice. Has a big sandy beach, very spectacular view. So the obvious place to anchor is off the beach here between the rocks and the cliffs to the west. Problem with that is it catches the south surge really badly, and you'll surge back and forth on your anchors all day. It'll almost like a rubber band effect, and it kind of drives you nuts. So little tip here that we've learned over the years is instead of anchoring in this area, we go around to the east, and you probably notice here on the chart or on the photograph, there's a reef coming out. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yeah. So come around here and it's usually covered with kelp, so it's pretty obvious. And drop your anchor here and your bow anchor, and then put your stern anchor way back over here towards these rocks in the beach. And you hang out here. This is all open and it does not catch the surge like the main anchorage does. It's way more comfortable. And you can still take your dinghy and go through the little gap there between the rocks and onto the beach. Just don't try taking your main boat, your big boat through there. It's about 2 feet deep. We saw a guy do that once, and they got all the barnacles off the bottom of their keel. So this is what it looks like from the spot that I just described, looking back towards the beach through the gap. And it's looking out to sea from the same place. Pretty scenic cliffs coming up on Coaches Prietos. So this has pretty popular for summertime trips. Got probably the nicest beach on the island. Satellite view. So here we got Coaches Prietos. It's this whole area. There's actually kind of 2 anchorages here that I'll describe. So if you're a small boat, you can anchor back in here right off the beach. Put your stern hook in as shallow as you dare to get, and put your bow out towards the southeast. You can jump off your boat and swim ashore. You're just like 50 feet off the beach, and it's kind of a neat thing to do. If you're a bigger boat like us, we're not real comfortable being down inside there. It's a little tight. So we hang out here in this area in about 40 feet on a single hook. And there's lots of room for probably a dozen boats there. Just around the corner over here is Albert's anchorage. Albert's is a little bit smaller. It doesn't have the big beach, big white beach. It does have a little beach. It does not catch the south surge quite as badly as Coaches does. In a big south swell, Coaches can be pretty bumpy. Anyway, from Gull Island down to Willows and Coaches, this is pretty much what it looks like. Dead calm. Most people will be motoring, and it's this whole side of the island is kind of a powerboat, motorboat paradise. Eagle eye view of the Coaches Prietos anchorage, with us anchored out kind of where I described out in the open. So, and this is a view looking down on the anchorage on the opposite side of the rock, Albert's. This is actually quite a few boats for Albert's. It's pretty tight. Definitely bow and stern anchor here for sure. And a little beach at Albert's. So hiking at Coaches, there's a road that leads up the canyon from right behind the anchorage, and you can follow that for longer than anybody wants to hike. You can go to the top of the mountain and look down the Central Valley. You can go all the way up to the ridge by Willows, or you can just take a short hop for a mile or 2 up the creek. So it just depends what you want to do. But it's a 4-wheel drive road, so it's easy walking. Some of it's kind of steep, but it's usually reasonably maintained. Another hike is to go up this ridge here to the west of the anchorage up to the top of Bowen Point. And it's kind of a scramble, but you get this kind of view. And it's accessed by, you see my cursor coming ashore here on the beach and then coming up this canyon right over here on the back side of this point, and you hike up this hill and along the ridge. You can see in this picture the fair amount of froth. There was a south swell running on this day. Not that much of a fisherman, but I do fish. In other words, when I get lucky and the fish get unlucky, we hook up. I don't do much more than throw out plastic bait and see what hits. Most of the places there is good fishing here.
Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah, just one thing from Mikepezdel. He'd mentioned that at one point he'd come into Coaches and did bow and stern, and he had his stern in a little bit in towards the beach. And when he got in there, it was nice, calm, great weather. But then a south swell came in to the point where it was breaking over his stern anchor. So he just tied a buoy on it, cast off the line, took in the bow, and he headed out. So there are times if you get that swell, if you're in too close, it could be interesting.
I've had that experience a couple times. Some of you old timers may remember the Thanksgiving storm of 1998. We were anchored in there and it looked about like this at 6 o'clock in the evening. By 8 o'clock, the wind came up to 10 knots. By 9 o'clock, it was 20. By 10, 11, it was blowing 40. Gusting to 50 straight into the anchorage. We had 4-foot waves, 5-foot waves breaking over the bow, and we were in close to the beach, and along with about a dozen other boats. We ended up getting out of there at 3 in the morning in a lull, but we thought we were going to lose the boat. So it can be very dangerous spot in the wrong conditions. So just pay attention to the swell and the wind. Okay, so that was our little trip around Santa Cruz Island. You can probably pick out 4 or 5 of those anchorages and make a really nice trip with a couple nights and a couple of the anchorages and then one night and in between kind of thing. Everybody hears about San Miguel and Santa Rosa, and not very many people get out there. But I'll tell you what, San Miguel is the neatest of all the islands. It's got the worst weather generally, but it's got the most wildlife. It's got the best harbor, the biggest beaches. It's just a neat place, and I'll try and show you some of that in the pictures here. So getting there, if you remember when we looked at the wind charts back at the very beginning, it was honking out there. Even when it's only 15 to 20, if you do like what this route plan is showing, like go out to the end of Santa Cruz Island, go over to, and this is Betcher's Bay here, and then try and go over here, you'll be in the wind, hard on the wind for almost the whole trip. And it is a chore. The only thing worse you can do is to come around the backside of Santa Rosa Island down here by Johnson's Lee, maybe spend the night there in this little nook, and then try and go up the backside of Rosa and up to San Miguel. This blows even harder in here and gets big seas. So what to do? Here's the trip I like to make. So go up to Santa Barbara, get a slip for the night, have a nice dinner there, get up really early in the morning, and motor up the coast. And when I say early, I mean like 6, 7. And motor for 3 or 4 hours till you get out to the west in the channel. And somewhere along in here, you'll run into the wind. And the wind is coming out of the northwest. And if you look at the lines here, you'll see that that puts us just on a close reach or reach. And you have a really nice 20 or 30 mile sail across the channel into Kyler without being hard on the wind. So that's my recommendation on how to get to San Miguel. No magic. It's kind of the same strategy that I shared with getting out to Prisoners and Pelican. You know, basically motor high a course out to the west, and then when the wind fills in, you crack off and do a nice close reach. Very typical out here, 18 to 20 knots of breeze in the afternoons. Okay. Kyler Harbor. This is the best anchorage on any of the islands in California. However, if you look at the chart in the middle and the right side there, the east side, there's lots of little rocks there. So pay attention to your charts or your chart plotter when you come in. Where you're going to want to approach from is the north, and you want to come in here near Hare Rock and Bat Rock in this area over here on the west side. There's actually some palm trees that are up here in the corner that were planted for the movie The Mutiny on the Bounty that was filmed here in the 1920s. And that's kind of a good landmark. Anchor right off of that. That's also the easiest place usually to land your dinghy. Don't attempt to come through here if you haven't been there before. After you've been here and maybe taken the dinghy around and looked at stuff and see where it's at, you can go in and out that way. But it is a big harbor. It's more than a mile across. On a windy day, the southeast side, which is where we're standing, it gets some pretty good windways on the beach. So typically you want to land way up here on the beach on the west side and then walk the beach down. Lines are in the hiking chart, and you can hike up to the ranger station and the campground site. There are other trails around there, but they require you being accompanied by a ranger for various reasons. One is used to be a military reserve. They're concerned about unexploded ordnance and also just to protect some of the fragile environment. But there are some really nice hikes here. You can hike all the way out to the west end, Point Bennett. I've never done that one yet, but it's like 18 miles round trip. So it's a really long day. Up here in the middle of the island is something called the Caliche Forest, a bunch of fossilized trees. And you can hike all the way down here to Cardwell Point, see a lot of animals. So the really unique thing about this island is the wildlife. It is the largest pinniped rookery on the West Coast. And there's literally tens of thousands of animals here if you go all the way around the island. Typical beach, there's several hundred on each little cove. And you got seals, sea lions, elephant seals, probably stellar sea lions. So this is very typical. The beaches up towards Harris Point, which is the north side of the bay, will have a lot more of sea lions, and the ones towards the south have elephant seals. They tend to segregate themselves. It's kind of interesting. We often take the kayaks and just kayak right along the beach and watch the wildlife. Here's a couple big elephant seal males fighting with each other. And then you get the juvenile sea lions, and they'll come swim right out to you, and then they start leaping out of the water and swimming circles around you, just like teenagers. It's a very magical place for wildlife. So these pictures were taken probably 10 years ago. In the last couple of years when I've been out there, there's probably 3 times as many animals now as what's in these pictures. There's a monument up on top of the cliff to Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, who explored this area in the 1500s. There are rumors that he might have died and been buried on San Miguel. They don't really know, and they've never found any evidence of that, but that's kind of the legend. So from the beach, this is kind of what the trail looks like hiking up to the top where the ranger station is. And you can call the ranger on channel 16 if they're there and talk to them and make arrangements if you want to hike further on the island. With COVID, there aren't a lot of people on the island, ranger wise. This might be something that waits for 6 months or another year before you can really get out there again and hike with a ranger. The Caliche Forest. Well, this is a hike down to Cardwell Point with one of our own members, George, who was a volunteer ranger out there for many, many years, and the Cardwell Point Rookery. So I don't know about you guys, but I never get tired of seeing this kind of stuff, just like whales. So each of these male elephant seals are probably close to 1,000 pounds in size. Anybody getting tired yet of sailing? Any questions on San Miguel? Good time to take a little break here.
Hey, Jeff, I've got a question back to that Thanksgiving storm you mentioned of, I don't know, 98. In hindsight, was there something in the weather report that you now are alert for? Or?
Yeah, it was not in the weather forecast. It was one of those, what do they call it? Cut off lows that came in out of nowhere and made just like a bomb storm. It caught aviation by surprise and some other people. Anyway, yeah, I don't know with today's weather forecasting whether it would have been better at showing it, but I know back then there was no hint that it was there. It just looked like, a typical Thanksgiving weekend, kind of gray and, cloudy. So it came out of nowhere and it was gone the next day.
Was it just localized on the south side of Santa Cruz, or was it broader?
That I don't know, because we were pretty focused on where we were.
Sounds terrifying.
Yeah, we did talk to a pilot later that knew we were out there and said he saw the report that it was coming. So apparently it was known. I think the takeaway from that is just to be very cautious about in any sketchy weather condition about being inside the reef there at Coaches. You're pretty vulnerable, and the way the cove is shaped, it just funnels it in and makes what's out there in open ocean even worse when it hits the beach.
Jeff, in addition to having problems in Coaches in that storm, further up the coast between Gull Island and Forney's, there's another little bight where boats can anchor. You showed it on your screen earlier, but there are a number of boats in there, and at least one of the boats ended up on the beach and was a total loss.
Was that in Willows?
Not in Willows, so it would have been up further to the west.
Okay.
Up the coast.
Yeah.
And in that particular instance, the people on the boat, they were trying to, get their anchor up, and they'd started up their engine and they hadn't cleared the lines, and they got a line in the prop and they ended up on the beach.
Yeah. We ended up actually cutting our anchor lines to get out because there was no way we were going to get them back on board in that sea state. We dropped everything and motored straight out in probably 50 knots wind and rain till we got out in deep water where we were safe. Probably the worst experience I've ever had in my life on the ocean in all the places I've been. Brian Kent and his family were out there with us, and he's been all over the South Pacific, sailed the races from Australia to Tasmania, the Hobart, and that kind of thing. And he said he's never seen a worse night than that night at Coaches. So we commiserate about that about every couple of years, remember it. We'll move on to Santa Rosa. I like to go down the south side of Santa Rosa. And this slot here that I told you not to go upwind against, well, it's a nice sail going downwind. And you can set a spinnaker and carry it all the way down here to South Point of Santa Rosa. And kind of the same way the wind dies on Gull Island at Santa Cruz, wind dies here at Santa Rosa. The backside of Santa Rosa is very similar to Santa Cruz. This is Johnson's Lee and looking east from there. And it's about 25 knots of wind behind my back. Here's my chart, my plot coming down. Johnson's Lee is a favorite for a lot of people. We've found a spot just a little further up where my cursor is called Ford Point, and it's a special little place. And I'll just show you a couple pictures of it. This is at Anchor in Ford Point. We were the only one there, so we anchored on a single hook. That's a nice big beach. Last time we were here a year and a half ago, there was probably 200 sea lions on the beach here. There's a wreck just offshore called the Crown of England that I dove on. Some of the stuff was salvaged and brought ashore, and this is some of the leftovers that's still sitting there. This wreck was in 1850s. How do you like this for a shackle? That's about a foot across, a huge shackle. I'm not sure what it was for. But anyway, 150 years in the salt, not done it any good. Another view of the anchorage. This is probably our favorite spot on Santa Rosa. Not what most people envision when they hear about or think about Santa Rosa. They think of a really windy spot. This is usually much more calm. It's kind of like Coaches or Willows. I've never shared the anchorage with another boat. We've always been the only person here. So if we continue around the island up past East Point and Skunk Point, Fetchers is main landing for the island. There's a pier there built by the National Park Service, and it's probably the best known place that most people have gone to when they go to Santa Rosa. You can even fly in. You can buy tickets and fly out of Oxnard and fly to Fetchers Bay in Santa Rosa. Here's a picture of the pier and the beach. It's actually a very good anchorage, good holding. The wind blows over the top of the island, and it can really blow here. A normal day is 25 knots, and we've been in here with 40 plus and have never had a problem with the anchors. Do be prepared though for wind. You're sheltered from the sea, so even when it's windy, it's pretty comfortable. And this is the beach near the pier. It's where you would land the dinghy. Beautiful beach here. Way off in the distance is the Torrey Pine Forest. That's probably 3 miles away. Easy flat walk. Santa Rosa probably has the best wildflower display of all the islands in the spring. Maybe it's just because I've hit it at the right time, but it's happened more than once. Yeah, this is looking back again towards Skunk Point and the Torrey Pines on the right there. Still Vale and Vickers Ranch House. It's being converted into a museum and into some educational opportunities. There's also a field station here for Cal State Channel Island. So the most interesting hike out of this area is a place called Lobo Canyon. And it's about 3 miles to the beginning of the canyon one way from the ranch, and then 1.5 miles to 2 miles down the canyon. Lots of puppies. And at the mouth of the canyon, you come out on the north coast. And there's actually evidence of some Indian Chumash where they were camped at one time.
You started that hike from Fetchers Bay?
Yes.
Looks beautiful.
There's Santa Rosa is actually a pretty huge island, and it's hard to touch more than just the edges of it. If you could go out there and camp for a week or two, you could probably explore a lot of it. From the boat, Fetchers Bay is the most practical place to explore ashore. Last island in our series, Anacapa. So there's really not much overnight stuff here. In very calm weather, you could overnight on the east side, down there by where it says East Fish Camp, Middle Island, this area in here. You could probably even anchor here behind Cat Rock. Not very many people do that. This is usually a day trip to go to Anacapa Island. And probably the most popular spots to land here on Anacapa are Frenchie's Cove, which is between the Middle Island and the West Island, and the Landing Cove, which is over by the lighthouse over on the East Island. Most of Anacapa is a marine reserve, at least on the north side. No fishing allowed. Consequently, the diving is really good. There's lots and lots of sea life here. Lots of fish, lots of lobsters, lots of sharks, rays, you name it. So East End, the famous arch, and the landing cove, which is right next door. There's a mooring ball here, but it's for Park Service use only. You can anchor next to it if you want to. And there's a dock here that you can bring a dinghy alongside and climb up the ladder. There's no place to tie up a dinghy, so you have to kind of shuttle back and forth. Once you go ashore at the lighthouse, it's about 200 steps up a staircase and ladders to the top of the island, and then you can hike out to Inspiration Point. It has a classic view looking over the islands. Lots of seabirds here. They're every 2 or 3 feet in the nesting season. And this is all of maybe 1 mile. I don't even think it's that to get to Inspiration Point. There's actually a campground here if you were so inclined. Now we moved west. This is what Anchorage and Frenchie's Cove looks like. There's a cobblestone beach. You can go ashore, land the dinghy, and you can hike through to the south side through the notch. Cat Rock in the background there. And explore the tide pools. Look at some of the evidence of people that weren't so fortunate. Anyway, I didn't say much about diving. I'm not an underwater photographer, so I don't have much in the way of pictures. But the best diving is generally in the same places where the marine protected areas are. That's why I'm showing this chart. So you'll notice that Anacapa, most of it's protected on the north side. It's probably some of the best diving in all the western islands out here. The area from Scorpion over to Pelican, that whole area has some really good diving. And then down on the south side of Santa Cruz, Gull Island is just fantastic, really rich. Can't go spearfishing in there because we're protected, but just lots of life. Kelp's thick, sea lions, the fish, the lobsters, you name it. So just be aware, if you're fishing though, these protected areas, you will get fined if you're fishing in them. Oh, I had to show a picture. Somebody asked about my lobster. Well, today it was a halibut picture. Anyway, that's our show for tonight. Any questions? Any comments from anybody? Anybody else want to contribute to the general knowledge here?
Yeah, this is Andy. I've been fortunate over the years. My strategy is follow Jeff, and it always turns out great.
Yeah, this is Joe again. I as someone with moderate knowledge, I want to chime in. I've been trying to follow along here in Fagan's guide, and you mentioned that Fort Point is one of your favorites on the south side of Santa Rosa. And for those people who, haven't been out much, Fagan says it's only for a temporary, setting, and it's one of your favorites. And I know that I have found that kind of combining the best knowledge I can gather from the books and from, local knowledge and so forth, but then adding in, like what's going on right now and paying attention and sometimes doing something contrary to what the books say leads to, beautiful anchorages. And sometimes when I go to things that, so this is a bomb-proof place and I have an opposite experience. So I just wanted to mention that you use your own common sense and read the conditions and carefully.
Yeah, that's a good comment, and kind of put it a little bit in perspective. Brian Fagan wrote that book at least 30 years ago, and it's all valid. The anchorages really haven't changed. One of the things that has changed in the last 30 years is that weather forecasting is much, much better. And so it's easier to go to places that we might have considered sketchy. It's easier today because we can go with higher confidence that the weather's going to be good or not, and not go. So like Ford Point is completely wide open to the south. You would not want to be there on any kind of hint of a low pressure coming through, like a southeast storm, winter storm, or anything like that. We've only been there in the summertime with the prevailing northwest wind.
Thank you, Jeff. Great job.
Hey, Jeff, I just wanted to say thanks for reminding us of all of the great things we've been missing out at the islands and what we all have to look forward to. Really appreciate this.
Jeff, this is Sherry Green. We had a wonderful trip to San Miguel over a year ago. We went with Island Packers. It was wonderful. And thank you for the presentation. That was wonderful too. We really enjoyed it.
So I will say about San Miguel, it's often very windy out there and Santa Rosa, but you can also, if you watch the weather and you have the flexibility to go when it's good, you can get some stunningly beautiful conditions out there. Last May, we went out there, and for 5 days, we never saw more than 5 knots of wind. So it does happen, and it's happened more than once. So you just have to pay attention to the weather, and when it looks really good, just be ready to go. Next month, we'll try and put something together with more detail on watching and reading the weather for cruising in the Channel Islands, or anywhere, but we're going to kind of focus on the Channel Islands.
Okay, thanks, everybody. This is the end of the